This is the first tutorial in the Mean Application Development series, and we are going to, through the course of these lessons, be learning how to use JavaScript to build a full web application client and server. Mean is an acronym that stands for MongoDB, which is the database, Express, which we will talk about today, AngularJS, which is used for our front end, and Node.js. Everything is kind of based around Node.js. Node.js is a layer that allows JavaScript to access your machine functionality. It provides access to the file system, to networks, things like that. So when we are running a Node application, we can write our code in JavaScript and have access to all kinds of machine functionality and things like that. The other key part of Node.js is this concept of packages. We can create a package that has a certain bit of functionality and then import that package into any application that we want to. And as we'll see, there are tons of packages that have been written for Node.js that we will use in our applications. So eventually in this course, we'll use a generator that's going to build out a lot of the infrastructure for us, but we're going to start at the lowest level so that we understand exactly what's going on. And so today we're going to use Node.js and Express, which is one of those Node.js packages that provides some web server functionality for us. So as we start, we're going to assume first that you've got a couple of things installed. First, you will need to install Node.js and also a piece of software called NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. When you install Node.js, you automatically get NPM installed with it. Now, I have that installed on my machine already. If you need to install it, you can go to node.js.org and you can download it there for whatever platform you want. So once you've got that running or installed, then we should be all set. And you can verify that it's installed by just typing in node version. Node-v. And as you can see, I have 6.9.1. There is, as you can see, the latest stable version is 6.11.3. As long as you are have version 6 something, we should be fine here. And the other thing that I will be using is Visual Studio Code, which is an editor with some additional functionality that I use for my JavaScript projects. It's a free download. There are other options that you can use, including Sublime Text or other editors. But I'll use Visual Studio Code here. And if you need to install that, you just go to code.visualstudio.com and it's a free download, so you can run that. So once we have Node and Visual Studio Code installed, we can get to work on our projects. So what I have on my system is in my users and my user account. I have a directory that I use for all of my web projects. And what I'm going to do here now is create a brand new web project. So I'm going to call this Mean Tutorial. So I'm going to make a directory for it, and we'll go into that directory. And to start a new Node project, you use an npm command called npm init. And this is going to initialize a brand new Node project for you. It's going to ask you several questions. What's the name of the project? Mean Tutorial is fine. Oh, I guess we'll call it. It does not like that. Version 1 is fine. Give it a index.js. I'm actually going to make my entry point server.js for now. Test command, we will get to that later. Command to run all of your automated tests. We will also talk about our Git repository in a little bit. We can link to Git for version control. Keywords, if you want to put in keywords, you can type in whatever you want. Real, mean, whatever. The author, you can put in your name here. The licensing, things like that. So what happens when you run npm init is it's going to create a package.json file. And this is what it's going to create for us. We'll say, yes, that is fine. So now, if we look in this directory, we now have a package.json file. From here, we're going to open up our Visual Studio Code. And now we're going to say open. And in Visual Studio Code, you generally open up a whole directory so that you can see your whole project, which is laid out, which will be in this main tutorial directory. So I'm going to open this directory. And as we saw, this just has one file in it. It's package.json, and it has the information that we put in there before. This is a basic web application using Node and NPM. It doesn't do anything yet. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to write the JavaScript code. Before we do that, we're going to use Express. Express, as I said before, is a package that sits on top of Node.js and gives us some additional functionality. So with NPM, we can pull in different packages that we want to use in our project. So another team created Express. It's widely used, so we can pull it into our project. There's a couple of ways to do it. We can directly edit this package.json file. Otherwise, you can use npm, which I'm going to do now. So we're going to say npm -- save. That, when you say -- save, that means add this package to your package.json file. And we're going to do Express. We're going to install Express. Npm install to install a package. Save it in your package.json Express. So now it will go out, it will find the Express package out on the web, and it will install it into our project. Now, if you look here, you will see that in a package.json file, there's a new section called dependencies. So this project depends on Express. And over here is the current version of Express that was installed. By default, it installs the latest. You can install a specific version if you want to. So we're going to install Express. We're going to install a couple of other things that we're going to talk about in a bit. So we'll do npm install save body parser. This is a package that just will allow us to parse apart the HTTP request body when we do a post request to our application. It's something that we're going to use eventually in our project. And then we're going to add one other thing. It's a package called NodeMon, and we'll see what that does in a bit. Basically, it monitors our application while it's running. So if we're editing one of the files in our project and we save those changes, NodeMon will automatically restart the application for us. So we want to install that as a dependency. It's not something that the application itself will actually depend on. Node and NPM allows us to specify dependencies for the application, and what they also call is dev dependencies, development dependencies, tools that we use in development for this project. It won't get deployed with a production version of the application, but we can use it for development. So we're going to do npm install. Now we're going to say save dev because it's a development dependency, and we'll add NodeMon. So at this point, we have still installing it here, but we will see once it's done installing it, we'll get a new dev dependencies section here in our package.json, and NodeMon will be in there. So now we've got dev dependencies here. The other thing I wanted you to notice is NPM has created this directory in our project called Node modules. And that's when it downloads and installs all of these external packages, they go into Node modules. So if I change direction to there, you'll see we've got Express, which is what we installed. But then Express also brings down a whole bunch of different dependencies that it requires. So your Node modules directory will oftentimes be quite large. And I will show you one other thing. If you are starting fresh, or if you download a framework or an application from somewhere, and all of those you just have your package.json file. There's an npm command. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all those node modules that were installed. So they're all gone now. But what we still have in our directory is this package.json. And package.json says that for this project, we need body parser, express, and nodemon. So if I just type in npm install, it will read package.json, see what this application requires, and install all of those dependencies for us. And we'll see in a second. So this is everything that it installed. And now we have our node modules again, and it will have all of those same directories in it. So from here, we've got our package.json. We know that we're going to build an application that uses Express. We're going to have nodemon monitoring our application as we go. Now we need to write some actual code. So in this directory, I'm going to do a new file. We're going to call this server.js. This is the entry point for our program. And this is the file that's actually going to be run to start our server application. Eventually, we're going to write the client side, but the server side running Express is going to be based here. And we're just going to do a few things. First, we need to bring in Express into our application. And with JavaScript, you just use a notation, use a keyword called require to require an external module. So when you say require Express, it's going to look out on node modules for Express, and it's going to bring it in. And now we've got a local variable in our application for the Express package. Now we're actually going to instantiate, we want an Express server running. So we're going to say our application is an instance of Express. So now we actually have an application that's using the Express server. One last thing, we do need our body parser. Require body parser. With JavaScript, you can use semicolons if you like, or you don't have to use them. I just out of habit use semicolons on here. Now we're going to tell, with our Express app, this app variable, we can tell it to use some of these extra tools that we require. For example, we want Express to use the body parser package. So we're actually going to do that there. We say app, which is our Express app, app.use. And this is a couple things that you can do a little bit of research on your own if you want to. But a couple of things we need to set up for body parser: URL encoded, and we're going to pass an object here. True. So we're going to do that, and app use body parser dot JSON. So we can parse part our JSON, any JSON requests. Express will set up an HTTP server that is listening on a certain port on your machine. So this is the way it's usually done in here. You can, in an Express app, you can say your port is process.env.port, or we'll say port 3000. So what this does is it's going to run on port 3000 unless in your command shell, when you're in the application, you set an environment variable called port. So when we're running in production, we're going to run on port 80 or port 443 or whatever. We can specify that in our environment. Otherwise, it's going to run on port 3000. So now our Express app is going to be listening on port 3000, and it's going to be listening to HTTP requests. And now we can set up REST API routes so that from our application, we can make a call to localhost port 3000 slash API, and we can set up different REST API endpoints for our application. Express has some built-in functionality to do that. It's called the Express router, and so now we're going to bring that into our application. So we'll create a variable for that. Our router is the Express router. Again, there are other packages that can be router packages that you can use. We're going to use the default REST one. And now we're going to set up a quick route to make sure that our application is running. So we'll say on our router, we're going to listen for a GET request on API. And when we do that, when we get when somebody sends a GET request to localhost port 3000 slash API, the router is going to pick it up and execute this function. Now, this is the new ES6 shorthand for functions. It used to be that you would write something to the effect of function res like this. And with this new the new ES6 syntax is just a little bit cleaner and easier to read. It's just kind of normal. Basically, it's saying we're going to execute this function that gets two parameters, your HTTP request and your HTTP response, and we're just going to send back a little JSON message back to the calling application that says message you endpoint. So it's just going to send back a little message to our application. Now, actually, I'm gonna make this. I will explain this in a minute. We're actually going to make this the root, and then we're going to use another little bit of functionality, app.use. So our app is actually going to listen at the API URL. So we're configuring our app to use localhost 3000 slash API. And when it gets an HTTP request to API, it's going to send it to the router. And then router, so if it's just nothing beyond that API, then it will execute this little endpoint. And then all we need to do to start our application is say app.listen on the port that we configured. And then once it's up and running, it's usually nice to do a console.log application, make this a little more mean tutorial is running on port, and we'll let them know what port it is. So that is all we really need to do to configure a basic Express app that's listening on a certain port and serving up data to a client that calls an API, a REST API. Let's see what we've got right now. To run a Node application is just as simple as saying node server.js. So now it's executing this server.js file. It's telling us that the main tutorial is running on port 3000. Great. Well, let's see what we've got here. Close out this. Let's go to localhost 3000. Now there's nothing running there, but if you remember, we configured that API endpoint. And when we call API, we get that message back that basically tells us that it's up and running and it is listening there. I want to do a couple other things here. As I mentioned, we have this package called NodeMon. I'm going to stop this server. And what we want to do is, instead of every time we make a change to our code, we don't want to have to stop and restart our server and things like that. What NodeMon does is it allows us to make changes to our application. And so we want to use NodeMon to automatically work with our application, look for any changes in our source code, and automatically reload the application for us. So to run NodeMon, we have to run it with our Node package manager here. So one of the cool things with NPM and Node is you can set up your own custom commands with NPM and tell it what to do. So for example, we're going to set up an NPM start command that will start our application. So if you go up here, you see there's a scripts section in our package JSON. So if you were to type in NPM test, which eventually we will use to run all of our tests for this application. Right now, there's nothing, when you type npm test, it just says, tell them there are no tests specified. We can try that. If you type in npm test, it says no tests specified. So we're going to add a new command here. We're going to call it the command start to start our application. And to start our application, we're going to run nodemon. And the file that we're going to look at is server.js. So when we type in npm start, it's going to run this command, and it's going to, so we'll say npm start, and you can see that nodemon fires it up, and it says our main tutorial is running on port 3000. So we go back to our browser, and we see that it is indeed running on port 3000. If I make a change here, let's say I want to change the message. Instead of saying you called the API endpoint, why don't we call this it's not the API endpoint, it is just the root endpoint. So you can see I changed that, it auto-saved in there, and you can see that it restarted my application. So now if I hit this endpoint again, the message changes. You called the root endpoint under API, which is what our app is listening to. So that's some just basic functionality that we can do with Node and Express. We're going to dive in a whole lot deeper next time. We're going to set up our database and create some real endpoints that retrieve and store data for our application. But before we do that, we're going to actually integrate with source code control. We're going to do that with GitHub. By default, Visual Studio Code has really nice integration with GitHub. So I'm going to go to GitHub, and I have an account set up under my name. And if you don't have one, sign up for a free account, get that set up, and you can store all of your projects here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new repository, and we're going to call this mean tutorial. We'll just say simple mean application for video tutorials. By default, it's public. You can pay to have GitHub private accounts. And do you want to put a README in this? And we're going to add a README because by default, a repository should have a README, and that's all it is that's in there. And now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at if you look here, we've got a brand new mean tutorial application, and all this in there is a README file. We're now going to link that up with our Visual Studio Code, what we've done in Visual Studio Code, and upload what's in that Visual Studio Code project to GitHub. So what we need is basically the link to this repository. So I'm going to copy that. You can use this copy button or Command C to copy. This is the link to that tutorial. Now, here if you go to this button here, this is our source code control. By default, is what we use for source code control. So we'll go here, and we'll click on this button that says Initialize Repository. So now we've got a Git repository. There is one thing that I want to do. So we've got all these things in here, all these node modules. We don't want to put all of these node modules into our Git repository. That's just we just want our code. So we're going to create a new file. I want to call it .gitignore, and we're going to tell it to ignore node modules. So basically, in this git ignore file, it tells it whatever you see in here, don't put that in source code control. You see very quickly we went from hundreds and hundreds of files to 3: our git ignore file, our package.json, and our server.js. So now we are going to commit these changes. This is our initial commit lesson 1. So you can put in your comment on what are we doing here. So we're going to commit these changes, and then it will pull all those in. So we've committed those changes. So now we're going to use this integrated terminal to link our remote Git repository to the local repository that we have here. We've committed our changes to the local repository. We've created the remote repository on GitHub. Now we need to get those all synced up. So you remember we copied the URL to the remote repository. So now we have to run a special git command in our terminal. Git remote add origin, and then point to that URL. So basically this is linking everything. We're creating an origin repository, a remote repository at this URL. And now we also want to let Git know that our default branch in that origin repository is the master branch. So you can see when it created this repository, by default it creates a master branch. You can have several branches in your repository. We're going to stick with the master branch. So we just need to tell Git that. So Git branch set upstream to origin master. So we're going to use the master branch. Let me actually, I need to sync this first. Now let's see what we've got here. Oh, I'm going to do a pull. So I'm going to do a pull, and we're going to get some errors here. But now it should know that there. We need to get things in sync. So now I know that origin master is our branch. I needed to do a pull to get some information from my remote Git. So now I'm going to do a rebase here. So now what we should see, is that README file came down from GitHub. And now what we have is we basically have pulled down that README file, and then we're going to push all of our changes up to GitHub. So now we're going to say push to origin. So you can either do it here with this push to, and then it will tell you what your options are. You can also do it here. You can do a just simple git push command. So git push everything to origin, and up it goes, and everything is up there. So now if we go back to GitHub and refresh this page, here are all of our files in source control. So that's the basics of setting up a quick Express app, integrating it with source control using NPM, NodeMon, and everything to run the application. From here, we'll build out our app, like we said, and use our database, our Mongo database, and do a whole lot more stuff, but that is for next time.